You hear it all the time, right? The United States is a nation of immigrants. I mean, it's a huge part of the American identity. This idea that almost everyone here can trace their family story back to somewhere else in the world. But has the reality of the country always lived up to that ideal? This famous image, which President Ronald Reagan used so powerfully, really captures that ideal perfectly. It paints this picture of America as a beacon of freedom and opportunity, a vision of hope that just pulls people in from all over the globe. And that same idea is literally baked into the national motto, E pluribus unum, out of many, one. The whole concept is that you can forge a single, unified nation from all these different peoples, all these different cultures and backgrounds. And that really brings us to the central question here. How does that inspiring vision square with what actually happened throughout American history? Because the nation's relationship with its immigrants, well, it's always been complicated. So to understand this, let's start back in the 19th century. This is when we see the first massive waves of immigration. And right alongside them came the first organized backlash. It's a pattern that's going to define a lot of this story. In fact, right from the very beginning, there were legal limits on who could truly belong. I mean, the country's first law on naturalization, passed way back in 1790, explicitly said that the path to citizenship was only for free white persons. That's at a really powerful precedent of exclusion, right from the get-go. Still, the young country was hungry for people. As America pushed west, there was so much land to settle and a huge demand for labor, to build the canals and railroads that would connect the whole thing. This promise of work and even owning your own land became this irresistible pull for millions of people, especially from places like Ireland, Germany, and Scandinavia. But the arrival of all these new groups sparked a powerful counter-reaction, nativism. Now, this isn't just about preferring people who were born here. It's this really potent mix of feeling culturally superior to new immigrants, while at the same time feeling economically threatened by them. And this wasn't just some vague feeling in the air. It actually became an organized political movement. You had the American Party in the 1850s. They're better known as the Know-Nothing Party because they were so secretive. And their whole platform was built around opposing the influx of Irish and German immigrants who were mostly Catholic. Okay, so now let's shift gears and head to the West Coast. The arrival of a different group of immigrants there would lead to a pretty dramatic and honestly unprecedented turning point in American policy. If you look at the timeline, the story is crystal clear. Chinese laborers were absolutely essential for building the Transcontinental Railroad, a monumental task. But as soon as that project was done, economic anxiety in the 1870s started to fester, and it quickly turned into resentment. And that resentment led directly to political action. And then, in 1882, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. This was a huge deal. It was the very first time the federal government banned an entire ethnic group from immigrating, not because of what they did, but simply because of where they came from. As we roll into the 20th century, that cycle we talked about, well, it starts all over again. America's industrial engine is just roaring to life, and that engine needs fuel, in this case, human labor. This demand kicks off another, even larger wave of immigration. But this time, the people coming over were from different places. The center of immigration shifted, and pretty dramatically. It moved away from Northern and Western Europe and towards Southern and Eastern Europe. Suddenly, millions of Italians, Poles, and Eastern European Jews were arriving in American cities, all looking for a new start. And these newcomers, they became the workforce that built America's Gilded Age. They're the ones who filled the steel mills, toiled in the coal mines, and worked the assembly lines in the factories. They provided the back-breaking labor that powered the nation's incredible economic growth. And you guessed it, true to the pattern, this new wave was met with a fierce nativist backlash. Groups like the Ku Klux Klan, already infamous for their reign of terror against African Americans, expanded their hate campaigns to target Catholics, Jews, and pretty much any immigrant they decided was an outsider. And once again, this widespread sentiment got turned into federal law. The Immigration Act of 1924 set up a very harsh quota system, and its goal was explicit: to heavily favor immigrants from Northern Europe while drastically cutting the number of people allowed in from Southern and Eastern Europe. The very groups who had just arrived. This act basically slammed the door shut on mass immigration for decades to come. The decades that followed brought a whole new set of national crises, a devastating economic collapse and a world war, And these events would again profoundly reshape how the country thought about immigration and its own immigrant communities. I mean, during the Great Depression, the economy just ground to a halt. Think about it. A quarter of the entire country was out of work. The demand for immigrant labor completely evaporated. That powerful economic pull factor that had brought so many people here, it was just gone. Then came World War II. In the absolute fear and panic after the attack on Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066. This authorized the forced removal and incarceration of over 120,000 Japanese Americans. And get this, most of them were American citizens. It was just a staggering example of how wartime fear could be turned into a weapon against an entire community. So, when we step back and look at all this history, a really clear and persistent pattern starts to emerge. It's this cycle of welcome and rejection, of economic need and cultural fear that has really defined America's immigration story. So here's that cycle. Let's just break it down. First, an economic need creates a powerful pull for workers. Second, a new group of immigrants arrives to fill that need. Third, a nativist backlash kicks in, usually driven by a mix of cultural and economic fears. And fourth, that backlash leads to new restrictive laws being passed. This four-step process has just repeated itself over and over again. Which brings us right back to where we started, that national motto, out of many, one. When you look at this long history of welcome and exclusion, of high ideals and deep-seated fears, it really forces you to ask, is that motto describing a destination America has already reached? Or is it describing a difficult and maybe endless journey that's still going on today?